Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode, in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. We're now in the middle of Season 3, and this is Episode 3. This week we're looking at the song labelled Roud 23, which is also Child Ballad number 7. It's a slightly odd one this week. As I found out during this week's history segment, it's actually two songs. However, it appears that Francis James Child felt they were similar enough to be given the same child number, and consequently, when creating the Roud Index, Steve Roud had to give them both the same Roud number. What fun! And so the two songs we're going to look at this week are Earl Brand, also known The Douglas Tragedy. Later on, we'll hear from our singer guest Hannah Martin, but for now, let's take a look at the history with In the Roud regular contributor Steve Gardam. Hello, Steve Gardam.
Hello, Matt.
Hello. How nice to see you. How are you doing?
Yeah, fine, thank you. Yeah, as always.
Good stuff. Great to have you back on the show. Your time and knowledge is very much appreciated on these matters. Otherwise, it would just be me talking, and that would be very boring. So we last saw you towards the end of Season 2 in the anti-penultimate episode. It was on Bruton Town, the murdered servant man, etc. So here we are now we're heading through Season 3, and we are Roud 23, Child Ballad number 7. Earl Brand, also known as The Douglas Tragedy.
Not quite.
Not quite. Okay, this is where I say I sit corrected already. It's fine. You can talk about that later on. But are we going? Is the child title Earl Brand? Is that the original child ballad sort of name?
Well, you're talking about two ballads.
Right. Okay. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay. Right. There are two ballads in one here. Oh, I think I did know this. Sorry, I think I did know this. In that there are two ballads, but they've both been given Child 7 or something. And consequently, Steve Roud had to give them the same Roud number because they've got the same child number. Yeah.
Yeah, they could have split them up quite easily, but I chose to go with Child. Yeah, I mean, crack open Child 7 and you get two for the price of one.
Lovely.
Yeah, Earl Brand has just a story in common with the Douglas Tragedy. They have no text in common apart from one commonplace in the middle about holding the horse thing and don't kill all my brothers type thing.
Right. And it's also quite similar to next week's episode on the podcast as Earlington.
Earlington has certainly an association and could probably be included in with them both because, again, it's the same sort of more or less story.
Yeah, but then Child gave that number 8, and consequently, Steve Roud said, "Okay, Roud 24." Yeah. So we'll come to that one next week.
Yeah.
So Earl Brand, then, what's the story in the plot of Earl Brand?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you've got to look at it from the point of view with both of these ballads that they are based on a ballad that is known all over Europe. You've only got to look at the Child's head notes, Professor Child's head notes in the English and Scottish popular ballads, and he gives a synopsis of just about all of the different countries that have different versions of this particular ballad. The nearest ones to the British ones which the British ones are obviously based on quite closely in the case of Earl Brand, is the Danish. Scandinavian generally, but Danish specifically. In fact, a couple a couple of the Danish versions are actually called Hildebrand and Guldborg. So you've got the brand in there. In fact, in one of them, it's Hellebrand, which is almost Earl Brand, you know. So
Yeah, wow, yeah, yeah.
whoever translated Earl Brand in the late 18th century, probably, from the Danish, uh, kept the name more or less, you know. Think there's
Right,
any
okay.
question of that because I mean the ballad has been traced back quite to 16th century, I think, in Denmark. So it's not a case of there's even a smattering of a chance that you know the Danish version is based on the English. That's a pretty preposterous idea. So you've got that's a translation. It's not exactly certain what Earl Douglas, the Douglas tragedy, is based upon. It's either again taking the same story and rewriting it. It might be based on. It could well be based on something. It's quite early. I mean, there is a version of it, a fragmentary version, The Child of El of the Douglas tragedy that probably all the other versions are based, British versions are based on, in the Percy manuscript from about 30. And that is by far farthest. We have to come right up to the 1790s before we get the Scottish versions of that particular ballad uh, blossoming and being included in the likes of Scott's collection found on broadsides. Uh, and it's quite possible that either the broadside were based on, you know, the versions being looked at by Scott, or in fact it could be even the other way around, that the Scott and Motherwell and all the people who were producing versions around about 1800, you know, they might be based on the broadside. Either way, you know, it's as apart from that one version in Percy manuscripts, they don't. We haven't got any other versions in between. It's you know, it just suddenly comes up, and there is another factor that might again. It's something that can't be proven, but it seems to have occurred with one or two other ballads that turn up in Scotland, and that is Bishop Percy when he was putting together his collection, the Reliques, Percy's Reliques. He was corresponding with the Scottish literati and the Scottish lords, people like Lord Hailes and a few of the others, and they were sending him Scottish ballads. Some of them manufactured Scottish ballads, one might add, like Edward. And then, you know, you can imagine the scenario where they were saying, "Well, can you send us anything?" And he was sending pieces out of the Percy manuscript. So that might be how some of the
Right.
uh, ballads were coming from Percy's collection into the Scottish diaspora. It might be. You know, I have no proof for that. It's just surmising and a theory. That's all it is. But anyway, so you've got two separate ballads
Sure.
there, basically. Earl Brand doesn't it occurs in about three very, very close versions, all from around about the same time, which is late 18th century, early 19th century. I think there's I've got them all here. In fact, there's materials for the Border Minstrelsy. That's Scott. That's Child. I think that's a very long version of Earl Brand. If we look at that first. There's a version in the Robert White collection in Newcastle University Library. No, that's Chowday, in fact. And that one I've just said, the one in the Border Minstrelsy manuscripts, that is it given later in Child. And then there's one from Paisley magazine, which is Motherwell. Motherwell published the Paisley magazine. There's a version in there as well,
Oh yeah.
and they all probably came from the same source actually. And there's one in the Campbell manuscripts as well. So all round about 1800. The Paisley magazine one's 1828. So they probably all derived from the same one translation. And they were translating
Right.
during the 18th century and into the 19th century, in fact, they were freely translating Scandinavian ballads and continental ballads into Scottish, turning them into Scots language. Um, so, it's not surprising that these versions turn up there. Earl Brand, yeah. You say you can't find any recordings of Earl Brand, and yeah. Well, I first came across the ballad Earl Brand being sung in our local folk club, Folk Union One, with the Watsons were the floor singers there. Ran the club for a long while.
Right.
And Jim Eldon was one of the floor singers there as well at the time, and he sang it. And unfortunately, I mean, he sang it quite a lot, and it left a large impression on me. I can sing you a few verses using the text that's there, um, which I will in a minute. But yeah, it left quite an impression on me, Jim singing it. But unfortunately, although he has done quite a lot of recording, made a lot of albums, I've not been able to find it on any of the albums. So I don't think he's recorded it.
No, I didn't come across it because I do own quite a lot of Jim's uh, output, and I'm pretty sure I haven't got it.
Yeah, it's not there, which is a shame, really, because he's the only singer I know who sang it. But anyway, just for that, I'll give you let's find a version that fits. The A version, which is probably what Jim sang. Oh, did you ever hear of the brave Elbrande? Lally, oh, lily, lally. He courted the king's daughter of fair England, all in the night so early. She was scarcely 15 years of age, lily, oh, lily, lally. Till so boldly she came to his bedside in the brave night so early. And yeah, it goes on like that. Uh, the story, basically, um,
Nice.
to come back to the story, is I say it's more or less the same story in all the versions. There are some different developments in different countries where they have different versions. The reasons for some bits of supernatural occurring occasionally, but I don't think so. Not in not in Elbrand anyway. Elbrand goes to well, in Scandinavian version, it's usually royalty. It's a king. In fact, it's the King of England, which is probably why it probably didn't originate in England. Because why would you say the King of England? He goes to the
Sometimes you get Lord William, don't you? A lot of oral tradition wants to
that,
have Lord
that's in
William.
the Douglas tragedy, which is
Okay.
a different ballad.
Okay, fine, fine.
Right. So in Elbrand, Elbrand goes to the king's court and he courts the king's daughter. She falls in love with him. They realise that this is a bad thing that they're not going to get away with this, so they decide to elope. They set off. On the way, they meet an old fella, an old Carl or what his sort of occupation or whatever is his relationship. I think in the Danish versions he's like steward of with the king's steward. But they meet this fella on the way. And he sort of asks what he's up to because I think she's in disguise, but I think he doesn't let on, but in some versions he doesn't lie on. In other versions he says what you're doing with the king's daughter. And then in other versions, he just says, "Oh, she's me, niece or something like that," and I'm just taking her away. Anyway, they ride away from the old man. The old man realizes what's happened, rides swiftly back to the king, rouses the king up, which is where you get the rise up, the queen or the king or whoever, and bring your 7 sons or 7 brothers, seven brothers, and we'll go chase after them and try and catch them up. So they're off on their way, and the 7 brothers, the cavalry, are coming up, racing up the hill, and he looks over his left shoulder as usual in all the ballads and sees them come in and gets ready to battle them. He's a very good swordsman, so he's quite confident he's going to beat them. Even though in some cases, at least 8 people he's got to battle against. And he says something like, if they come at me one by one, which is the accepted, I think, chivalry. If they come at me one by one, I'll finish them off. Don't worry. And he asks her to hold his horse, and in quite a few versions, certainly in El Brand, uh, don't call me by name. And this is a sort of, I think it's in some places it's a supernatural thing, in others it's a sort of an etiquette thing. If they know my name, I can be defeated. It's got a sort of a supernatural element to it.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, she's standing by holding his horse. They come riding up and come at him one by one, and he polishes them off. Uh, he gets down to the sixth brother, kills the sixth brother, and in some versions it's the seventh, the youngest, the seventh brother, who she is feeling very sorry for. And in other versions it's her father who's about to get dispatched, uh, and and she calls out his name, Elbrand, Elbrand, hold you don't kill my father, he's the only father I've got, or don't kill my youngest brother, he's the only one left, sort of thing.
He's the only
And
father I've got. That's a very good way of putting it. He's
yeah,
the only father I've
well,
got. I'll use that
something
one.
like, yeah. Oh, it's a common thing in ballads.
Yeah.
Anyway, um, she, she calls out his name, and he, either because he's distracted or because it's this supernatural thing that allows this younger brother to stab him, and not to kill him there and then, but to stab him. And then I think he must dispatch the other brother, and so they both ride off on the two horses, the the grey and the white horse, and they ride off to his mother's house. And on the way, they stop for him to have a rest by a stream, and she notices his heart's blood uh, pouring down, and she laments that. And anyway, they actually get to, in some versions, they get back to his mother's house, and and there he dies, and then she dies of love, and then in not in El Brand, but that's the same story in the Douglas tragedy, more or less. The only text that they have in common is the bit where she is asked to hold the horse while he fights the brothers. That's the bit, and that occurs in other ballads, which I'll come to in a minute. So you could really call that a commonplace.
Right.
So the two ballads literally have nothing in common text-wise, only story-wise, the plot-wise. And in the Douglas tragedy, that's had the usual sort of what do we call them, Rose and Briar ending that was originally attached to, I can't quite remember, as one of the other child ballads anyway, Fair
Oh
Margaret
yeah,
and
it came up in maybe a song we did in
Barbara Allen.
season one.
It's been
I can't
attached
remember.
to Barbara Allen more than
That's right, Barbara Allen, and you get Lord Lovell as well, don't you?
yeah,
That is the same thing.
Lord Lovell's not a very old ballad anyway.
No, and I'm pretty sure it came up in something else that we did on
Yeah,
it.
it's a commonplace. Yeah, a
Was that
common.
was that in Bruton Town? Was that in Bruton Town
No,
with
no,
you?
it's
Did we
not in
do that?
Bruton
Did
Town.
we look at
No,
that
no, it's
one?
not
No, it
in.
wasn't Bruton. Oh, I could have sworn it turned up
Oh,
in another
it
ballad
will
we
have.
looked
It will
at.
have. It's been tagged on to a lot of ballads. The Rose and Briar, where the rose grows out of her grave or his grave, and the briar grows, and then they twine around the church. The extra bit that's been added on, I think, by Walter Scott, or certainly one of the people who ply him with fake ballads, is the bit about uh, throwing it into the St Mary's Church and throwing it into he chopped off the tops of the rose or the briar and threw it into the St Mary or something.
Okay,
That's the third part of that sort of little trilogy of the rose and briar ending in Lord Douglas, but
right.
it doesn't occur at all in El Brand. And I don't think although it's known all over Europe. It's not just attached to a British ballads. It's that's certainly very well known in Danish ballads is the rose and briar thing. Although it's not always a rose and a briar, it's sometimes other plants that twine and fastened around the top of the church. Um, so that's something that's again. It might. I don't think that will have been added on from other British ballads. I don't think it was added on from a Danish translation, because the Rose and the Briar is usually specific to Britain. So you've got that. That's the story basically. Yeah. The Rosenbauer ending there on it. And then you've got the third thing that we're looking at, which is the this bit in the middle about the holding of the horse and one by one. That is also definitely what we call a commonplace, because that occurs in a 17th century ballad, a broadside ballad as well, called the Bold. Well, it's nowadays called the Bold Dragoon or the Bold Soldier. But have I have a
Oh
copy
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
the early 17th century one in here somewhere, so I can give you its title. The Seaman's Renown in fact, there's two ballads. One of them's the seaman's renown in winning his fair lady, and the other one's the masterpiece of love songs. And in one of them, he's a sailor. Is It's not a lord at all, Elbrand. It's a seaman who comes and woos the lady, and that has that commonplace in it. And the other one is the masterpiece of love songs, and it's almost word for word the same ballad, but in that it's a keeper, a bold keeper, rather than a sailor. And the tune for both of them, I think, or certainly, is A Week Before Easter, which we do know what that tune is. Certainly, the masterpiece of love songs is the tune A Week Before Easter.
Oh yeah.
And that the verse there is, if I can find it quickly, uh, yeah. Lady, if you will consent to be my bride, I will gird up my sword. No, that's not it. Uh, yeah. Come on, quoth the keeper, 'tis no time to prattle. I see by your swords you're prepared for battle. With his sword and buckler he made them to rattle. The lady held the horse for the keeper. So that's and then the next
Mm.
verse, he cut them and hewed them on the place he did stand. Or then quoth the Lord, bold keeper, hold thy hand. If you'll give your daughter 30,000 in land, you shan't die by the hand of the keeper. Uh, so you get that, but that's just a commonplace. And Bronson actually included lots and lots of versions of that Bold Dragoon, the Bold Dragoon, in in an appendix to his L Brand versions in traditional tunes of the child ballads.
Yeah, so that's because I know that one as Route 321,
Yeah, yeah,
the Bold Keeper,
exactly.
and I sang it on the second Dovetail Trio album that I was in, and yeah, so that was I recognised those verses from the Bold Keeper
Yeah. Mm.
from that one, which is a different round number. So in about 10 years' time, I might get to that song,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
I
We'll
wonder
see
who
how we
you'll get
go.
to sing it.
Well, not me, actually. It would have been 15 years since I. Oh no, it's already been about 10. Oh, no, dates are not my strong suit. Um,
A
right,
well-known folk song, obviously.
but back to yeah, Earl Brand then. So how you may have already said this, not that I've forgotten anything, but how far back is this traced then? Where do we? How far back do we go?
Well, I mean, if you consider how widespread it is all over Europe, and that the Scandinavian versions go back to the 16th century, I think, 16th, 17th century, and broadsides then. They were printing these ballads in Denmark in the 16th century. Whereas
Wow,
we were latecomers on that one. We were printing them mainly in the 17th century.
dear oh dear oh dear.
Yeah. And I would guess that it's one of those ballads that's one of the very earliest, sort of 15th century, something like that.
Okay. And then in Scotland, then when it turns up in Childs.
Well, as I say, the Child of El was sent. I reckon was probably sent up into Scotland by Percy, and then it may have developed from there. Other ballads did, so it's quite possible that one did.
Okay.
But the earliest the recognition of that ballad in any form of the Douglas tragedies, 1792.
Right. Okay. 1792. That's pretty good though. Nevertheless.
Yeah, it's still pretty old and still widespread and still well sung by
So yeah. So as we were discussing before we started recording this, the Douglas tragedy is the one that tends to go around, and you don't really hear Earl Brand, even in the field of field recordings,
yeah.
you don't really get Earl Brand, and so I usually ask, was this song particularly popular and widespread? And in terms of Scotland and the UK, not really, not at all, almost
Yeah.
maybe. But yeah, it's odd that. But then the Douglas tragedy, when we come to our field recordings later on, it's pretty much all the Douglas tragedy.
Yes,
Even in
it will be.
America, even the field recordings in America are the Douglas tragedy.
Mm.
I think you said so.
Yeah, they are.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't really know a lot about the later versions of the Douglas tragedy, but there are plenty of them, obviously.
Yeah, and I know that I know this is we don't normally talk about revival recordings on this side of the podcast, but Jim Moray did a version, a setting of Lord Douglas that's on his album Skulk from 2012, and it's he combined it with new tune and some words that incorporates a Danish variant of Hildebrand and Hilda, but a podcast that predates In the Round, which is called the Old Songs Podcast, run by John Wilkes, which I highly recommend people go back to. It was only 2 seasons of 10 episodes, and it was him and a focusing on each one. And one episode was Jim Moray, and they did a whole episode on Lord Douglas.
Yeah.
So maybe in that episode, I did listen to it a long time ago when it first came out, so I probably forgot it all. But maybe there's a bit more on Lord Douglas there, and this is the Earl Brand bit. But
Mm.
I will definitely put a link to that episode of the Old Songs podcast in the show notes for this. Um, is there anything else to say? I mean, we've not been talking for very long. However, I don't mind because it's nice to, on the last season, season two, we had a handful of quite long episodes, and so it's nice and quite refreshing when when there's sometimes not much to talk about. So, is there anything else about this you want to say, or we can start to wrap things up?
No, I can't really think of anything else. But I mean, I've lots of versions of the Danish version. Um,
Yeah.
because I've got lots of Danish Prior's books and Axel books and even some of Grundtvig's books as well. So in Danish, but I don't read Danish, but most of them are translations, so that's okay.
That's good. Okay, fine. Well, in terms of field recordings, yeah, all we've got is a handful of Douglas tragedy variants, essentially. Um, Starting in America, we've got a 1929 recording, which is on an anthology called My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, British Songs in the USA, and it's recordings of 1920s and 1930s. Most of these were originally issued on commercial 78s.
That's interesting. My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, and they're calling it a British song.
Well, that's the title of the album,
It is.
is My Bonnie Lies Over the
Funnily
Ocean.
enough, it is a British song, but lots of people
Well, there,
think it's an American song.
well, there you go. I mean, it's got a round number, so we may come to it at some point. But on that album, it's a double disc. It's a two. Oh no, it's a 3 disc album. Really heavily packed stuff. Is a recording of a Professor I.G. Greer of Thomasville in North Carolina, and he's accompanied by his wife on the dulcimer.
Hmm.
And they're with him singing "Sweet William and Fair Ellen." And I think the song is split. It's a 5 minute song for them, so it's split into 2 tracks. I think
I think that
for
Sweet
some
William
reason.
and Fair Eleanor or Ellen is an American, specifically an American for American versions, and I think Hannah's version sounds like it's probably an American version or based on.
Okay, right, cool. Well, yeah, we'll get Hannah to talk about that later. But yes, if people want to track down the My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean British Songs in the USA. Sweet William and Fair Ellen is on there. That's recorded on the 26th of October 1929. The other American recording I know of came out on anthology on the Musical Traditions label that was run by Rod Stradling, and that CD was called When Cecil Left the Mountains, Historic Recordings of Appalachian Singers and Musicians, recordings made between 1927 and 1955. And you can find the book notes for that are all on the website. And on there is a woman, a Mrs. Victoria Morris of Mount Fair in Albemarle County in Virginia, and that's a 1950 recording. Yeah, that's really good as well. I was very pleased that those exist. The only other ones I've found is a couple of Scottish ones, both available to hear. I'll play clips of them in this episode, but you can hear the full versions on the Kiss to Riches website, which I always put a link to Kiss to Riches in the show notes on each episode, so you can find it there. But I'll put the direct links to these songs on the site in the show notes as well. There's a recording of Bella Higgins from Blairgowrie in Perthshire, singing what is labelled as the Douglas Tragedy. That's a 1954 recording sung to Hamish Henderson. And it did, in fact, come out on a CD from the School of Scottish Studies archives called Hamish Henderson Collects. So there's a proper officially released CD of that, but the actual track itself is on the Kiss to Riches site. And then I also found, just before we started recording, on the Kiss to Riches, a recording made by Kenneth Goldstein of a guy called George Fraser, with him singing a song lasting almost 5 minutes called Lord William. And so that's there as well, and it's rather good. I like his singing voice; it's rather nice. So yeah, all we've got really is Professor and Mrs. Greer, as it's called, Mrs. Victoria Morris, the two American ones, and then Scotland, Bella Higgins and George Fraser. I think that's all I can come up with, but I'm sure there are others buried somewhere if you want to dig for them. But yeah, but they're all sort of the Lord Douglas variant rather than anything Earl Brand-esque. That's what you were saying, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Good. Lovely. Well, yeah, we'll leave it there. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and talking about this stuff. Certainly when you get into some of the child ballads that didn't make it much into oral tradition, and sometimes even less so into the revival era, which there are some in this season, all the history gets a bit murky, as I think you've proven.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yes, thanks for unpicking some of that. I don't know whether it's helped or not, but it's good to have it, it's not written down, but on audio. Anyway, I believe this is your only appearance in this season of In the Round, so thanks for being on.
No worries. Enjoy it.
And yeah, we'll definitely have you back. And I know we had you on last week on the Patreon for The Lady of Robin Hood's Bay as one of Mossy Christian's 3 choices in his Singer's Choice mini-season. I think we're going to have you back in a couple of weeks on the Patreon for a song in another upcoming Singer's Choice mini-season, more of which on the Patreon later. So yeah, but in terms of the main podcast, we won't see you again for a handful of months. But I hope you keep well in that time.
Give me time to put a few more ballads.
It will indeed. So until then, Steve Gardam, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Matt.
A huge thanks to Steve Gardam for providing us with the history of Earl Brand and the Douglas Tragedy. As ever, at this halfway point in the episode, we're going to listen to a few different versions of this song sung by traditional singers. Now, there aren't many, actually, that turn up in oral tradition, but I've managed to get my hands on 3 or 4. So we're now going to hear The Douglas Tragedy from the singing of Bella Higgins, and then Wake Up, Wake Up from the singing of Mrs. Victoria Morris, then Sweet William and Fair Ellen, sung by Professor and Mrs. Greer, and then finally The Douglas Tragedy, sung by George Fraser.
Oh, hold, Lord William, she says, your strokes are a wonderful sore. As many's a sweetheart ever I may get, but an old father I'll never get more. It's your choice, Lady Margaret, he says. Your choice to come or stay. For I may go with you, Lord William, she says, for you have not left me a guide. Wake up, you seven sleepers, and it's to be one of me. You take care of your oldest daughter, dear, for the youngest just are going with me. He mount her on the milk white steed, himself upon the diaper gray. He drew his buckler down by his side, and away ran a singing away.
Sweet William rode up to the old man's gate, and boldly he did say, the youngest daughter, she must stay at home, but the oldest I'll take away. Come in, all seven of my sons, and guard your sister round, for it never shall be said that the steward's son has taken my daughter out of town.
Rise up, Lord Douglas, she said, and put on your armour so bright. Let it never be said that a daughter of thine was married to a lord overnight. Rise up, my seven sons bold, and put on your armour so bright, and take better care of your younger sister, for your elders away last night. He mounted her on a milk-white steed, himself on a dapple grey, with a bugle horn hanging down by his side, and so lightly they both rode away.
And you can find the links to those tracks and the albums or web pages they're on in the show notes. On to the second half of this episode. I spoke with singer Hannah Martin, and we chatted about her history with folk music, her work with the Gig Spanner Big Band, and her version of this song, Earl Brand. Well, hello and welcome to In the Roud, Hannah Martin. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for agreeing to do this and being here. This is great. It's amazing when I come to book some guests for this. I sort of get in contact, and they say yes, and we sort of plan stuff. And then I kind of realise that we've not actually met before. Somehow, there's quite a lot. It's this thing about everyone, this kind of byline that everyone knows everyone, and it's all really lovely. Yet,
but I don't live in Sheffield.
Well, no, but even on the folk scene, people pass everyone by at festivals and such.
That's true.
And somehow you and I have not crossed paths yet.
No, well, it's lovely to meet you.
Likewise. And how are you? Are you all right?
I'm good, yeah. I'm sick of all the winter illnesses at the moment. I'm ready for spring to arrive, but that seems to be happening. So, yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah. That's all we can ask for sometimes is just, I think there's maybe it's apocryphal, but there's one of those things that goes around on social media where it says, like, there's a word in Swedish that means, and it's this long description, and I don't know if in Germany or Sweden they have words that mean like long things, but I thought I read somewhere that there's a word it's either German or Swedish that means awake and not crying, and sometimes I feel like that. You know,
That's a good day.
how are you? I'm awake but not crying. Sometimes the very least we can do.
It is.
Right. So, yeah, we're here to discuss Earl Brand, Round 23, Child 7. But
Mhm.
first of all, give us a little bit of Hannah Martin history. What's your sort of musical upbringing, your history of folk music? Did you find folk music, or was folk music inflicted upon you at an early age, like so many of us? What's the story, Hannah Martin?
I think a bit of a mix actually. I was brought up by parents who were, I wouldn't exactly call them folkies, but they were into folk music, but more the sort of Bob Dylan, Joan Baez folk revival end of things. And so I remember sitting and listening to their record collection as a kind of sacred process, getting the record out and carefully not touching it and putting it on. Um, and
That's
then
the joy of physical media.
Yeah, exactly. It was lovely, like looking at all the artwork and reading the lyrics. And actually, I remember trying to work out the story of Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, listening to the lyrics, sitting trying to work out what on earth was going on. And so I suppose I was always quite drawn to like the big story ballad type songs. And I think a bit later on, my parents got sort of back into Steel Eye Span and Fairport Convention and those kind of more specifically British traditional folk material and being like, listening to Tam Lin once again, figuring out the story and really loving that. And then when I was about 9, I started playing the violin, like having violin lessons at school. And a friend of my parents was like a real folkie, like actually into the idea of going and collecting songs and playing the sort of much more trad stuff. And and we were at her house for dinner one day, and she said, "Oh, come on, get your violin out and play along." I'd just come from a lesson, I think. And she's the singer Margaret Duffy, from Brixham, and she's a wonderful singer. And I just really enjoyed this being thrown into the improvising thing at that moment. I was young enough not to be too self-conscious, and so that got me into the more traditional folk world straight away, really, from quite a young age, playing in sessions and doing gigs and stuff. So I did grow up with it in that sense, but I sort of found my own way there as well. And then I came back to it as I got older. Um, when I met Phil, I we discovered a mutual love of Sidmouth Folk Festival because I was brought up going there, and that was a huge influence. And I remember my parents taking me to see Steel Eye Span there when I was probably 10 or 11.
Ah, was that so I span at Sidmouth? Would that have been at the Arena
Yeah.
Theatre? I was at that gig, I'm
No,
sure.
oh my
I
goodness.
think I was at that gig. I just, as you said,
Yeah.
growing up at Sidmouth, I grew up going to Sidmouth Folk Week as
Yeah.
well.
Oh my goodness. So
So,
important for so many of us,
yeah,
isn't
how
it?
often have our paths almost crossed?
Yeah, oh,
Yeah,
exactly. It's ridiculous that we've not actually met. Yeah.
yeah. Unless you
Yeah.
did Shooting Roots, joined in with Shooting Roots at some point.
Well, no, see, actually, I'm slightly, unfortunately, being from Devon, we used to commute to Sidmouth rather than camp. My parents weren't up for camping,
Ah,
and it's not like a short drive either. So, no,
you
we
weren't.
used to go for just like one concert and
Oh, I see.
get
You wouldn't get in
tickets.
there for 10 in the morning for the Shooting
No,
Roots things.
sadly not. No,
Ah,
but never mind.
there we go. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I was at that Steel Ice Band concert as well.
Yeah, well, it was
Yeah.
brilliant, and I came away thinking, right, well, I want to play fiddle like him and sing like her.
Well, yeah. Want to
Strange
want to be
paths we
want to be in a
tread.
band with one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it weird? Isn't it strange? I think now I've got my own kids, I feel like, oh, I've got to be really careful what I introduce them to because you just never know how it's gonna affect the rest of my life, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're in a duo with Phil as well, aren't you? And
Yeah,
thought
yeah. So
maybe.
Edgelarks is our duo, which we haven't done loads with recently, but we've got lots sort of planned. Um, and we met when we were just sort of starting out, and we did our duo for quite a long time, and then we were doing a gig in Stratford on Avon, and in walked these three guys that we sort of recognised, and it was Peter and Sasha and Roger, Gig Spanner, the trio. They just happened to be on a day off mid-tour, and they were in Stratford and looking for something to do, so they came to our gig.
Ah,
And
lovely.
Yeah, well, it was lovely, except I was like, oh my God, the pressure's on now. Play that violin well, you know. Um, and yeah, so it was great. It was great to meet them. And what had actually happened, the reason that they twigged our gig was on was that my mum, my mum had been to a Gigs Spanner gig and said, "Oh, you know why my daughter wants to play the violin? Well, you know," and she's turned out being a folk musician. It's like, yeah, a lovely little connection there. So it was really nice that they listened to her and came to our gig. And then they invited us to do some gigs with them. Um, and we did. We did the sort of spontaneous collaboration. And then one thing led to another. We formed the big band. And long and short of it, we ended up arranging lots of traditional songs, including Earl Brand.
There we go. And here we are. And it all led to In the Round.
Exactly. It was all building up to this.
After this. So, yeah, in terms of so this is a song that you sing with the Gig Spanner big band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I actually I came across it a long time before bringing it to the big band. Myself and Phil, we did a residency at Cecil Sharp House I think it was in 2014, so a little while ago. And we were doing research into Cecil Sharp's collecting in the Appalachian Mountains, this English folk songs from the Southern Appalachians book that he published in 1917. And I was going through that and came across Earl Brand as a song. And so me and Phil started arranging it, just the two of us, just because I was just really struck by just such a beautiful tune. And then when we were putting together the first Gig Spanner album, which, oh, I'm not sure when it was, a lot more recently anyway, 2019 possibly. I was thinking about songs that I would like to bring to it, and this is one that we'd ended up not doing it as me and Phil, and so I brought it to the band, and Peter was like, "Oh, I love that tune," and then we did it with the big band.
So can you remember, or do you know who Sharp collected it from in the Appalachians then?
Well, looking back through my notes from 2014 and the song that I sort of thought I'd found, I think I've cobbled my version from several of Cecil Sharp's versions because in his and Olive Dame Campbell's collection there's an A, a B, a C, and even a D version of Earl Brand, and they're all the tunes are actually quite different, and the lyrics it's all on a theme, but it's yeah. And so I think I've taken the A version, which was sung by Mrs. Polly Shelton at White Rock in July 1916. Um, and looking at it again, like it is that beautiful tune that I was really struck by, except I have changed the last note without realizing. So
Oh,
that's the oral tradition in action, and I don't think I could consciously change it back. I think it would
so
completely throw me.
so does this? I always find this stuff quite interesting. The way a single note can. I don't know whether it has done in this case, but a single note can sometimes change the whole flavour of the piece.
Yeah.
What was the original note in relation to the tune? Not just like D, but just how did it go before and after?
So I've made it more minory.
Oh, okay.
So it's the last line. Had taken her out of town is what I sing, and it's had taken her out of town.
Oh, it
Yeah.
just resolves. You unresolved it.
Yeah, I'm terrible for doing that actually. I always want to have everything unresolved. I don't know what that says about me psychologically, but definitely my musical leaning. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I've yes, I like both actually.
Yes, I always find that musically sort of more interesting. And I suppose when you've got a long way to go in a song, having a slightly unresolved ending to the verse kind of gives you a bit of momentum forwards. And there are a lot of verses in this, so yeah.
There you go. It's a good long ballad.
Mm.
Sometimes it deserves the length, and sometimes not.
Yeah, I think Earl Brand does stand up to the length actually. There's not a lot spare, it's all story really. And I always think that the first section where they're sort of setting off over the plains. To me, in my head, it's a Western. Like it's very cinematic and like this enormous landscape, and they're kind of lost in it. And then there's this bloody fight scene, and it's just, I mean, it's quite melodramatic, but singing it, I do find it like a quite a moving emotional experience as well. The kind of, I feel like quite often in folk songs, some sort of horrible thing happens, and there's not a lot of emotional feedback. It's kind of just stated that that happened, and then possibly they die out of a broken heart, but you don't really get that emotional thing. Whereas in the lyrics of Earl Brand, it's kind of she's crying out like um was it? Oh, hold your hand, William, she cried. Hold your hand for sure, for love runs free in every vein, but father, I'll have no more. I mean, that's actually, I think, quite beautiful poetry.
Absolutely.
And then the kind of discussion between them as well, because he's kind of like, well, if you're not up for this, then I'll wish you far away. And she says, no, 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 wind you east, wind you west. I'll go along with you. And it's I think quite yeah, it actually really gets me when I'm singing it, combined with the beautiful tune, of course. And then
Yeah.
that the resolution thing as well. I mean, I know it's one of those tropes that you get in a lot of folk songs, the whole thing about the out of her breast sprung a blood red rose and out of his a briar they grew to the top of the church. And there they tied a true love's knot and the rose ran around the briar. And although it's sort of very done, there is something moving about that idea that this like awful story has happened, but somehow the love won out, I think is what it's trying to say. So it feels
Yes.
like it has like a kind of contemporary resonance as well as being a very melodramatic story.
Well, yeah, I guess it can be looked at, that kind of thing, as if it's an in the real world physical manifestation of the idea of them finding peace and happiness in another life, in the afterlife,
Yeah.
in death.
Yeah, exactly.
When I've just let it be known for the record, I was not the first person to mention films in this episode, because it's normally me. But I've just, you mentioned westerns. I've just recently watched Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, and so there's an idea about Laura Palmer finding a bit of peace in death after her horrific life. So that's. But I think the idea of the flowers coming out of the bodies. Yeah, maybe that's something to do with there is peace for them in death kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Exactly.
in there amongst
Mm.
many other readings, I suppose. And going back to the that whole the emotional aspect of it, I guess that's something you can afford to take your time on when it comes to ballads, as opposed to songs, if you want to give them separate definitions, because that's always a conundrum. How to what is the definition of a ballad as opposed to a song or something? But if one of the more sort of obvious not definitions but characteristics of a ballad is that they are much longer than an ordinary song might be, and so with a ballad you've got the time and the breathing space to actually delve in sometimes into the emotional state and the psyche of the characters
Yeah,
in
exactly.
the text. If it was shorter, you would have to. I guess it would end up being a bit more of a almost a bullet point sort of blow by blow account of the story without much
Yeah, without the
personal.
emotional depth.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think as a singer, it's obviously a challenge singing something with a million verses that goes into all that. But actually, obviously, there's a lot to tease out as well in the way that you sing it, which I
Mm.
really enjoy. Yeah.
And then if you've got a band doing it as well, then you can extend that with the band arrangement to.
Yeah, exactly. And with Gig Spanner, we work in a very collaborative way.
Oh, I've heard about this. I've heard whispers of this arrangement rehearsal idea. Do tell.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think it's a bit epic. I think we're basically sort of an anarchist collective. Like every decision must be okayed by everybody, and it's all done on complete consensus model, which is a wonderful idea, but obviously takes about 1 million hours.
Yes, there is a lot to be said for the word compromise.
Yeah, sometimes there's, a huge debate over a little chord here and a little tiny bit there. But anyway, I think it leads to the whole band being quite pleased with the results. And for this arrangement, we actually kept it very sparse as a band. That the sparseness was sort of the idea for the direction, to let the song lead, and obviously the lyrics, the story has to come through. So not our most complex gig spanner arrangement, more of a subtle job. But yes, we do sort of all sit in a room and agonize over every single decision for every single song, which is a bit of an epic process sometimes, but I think worth it. I think we come up with stuff that's much more interesting for that, you know.
Sure. I mean, if you're gonna put the time and invest in that idea, then all power to you. I think most people would just, for the sake of getting the song finished, would go, yeah, okay, well, I'll let you have that bit of the arrangement,
Yeah, that's
and
fine. Yeah.
that's fine. We'll just move on. It's fine. Get it done. We've got a deadline, you know.
Hmm.
But no, it's great if you're all invested in that idea, then absolutely fantastic. So, as you said, it ends up being quite a sparse arrangement with gig spanner at big band, but you've got to sustain that over a long ballad.
Yeah, so the kind of keystone of the arrangement is this kind of do 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 from Peter's fiddle, um, which gives it kind of an element of pace, although it's not a fast pace, but it kind of sets a movement. And then I think everyone in the band is really good at listening. That's sort of our our emphasis really. And so it sort of very much ebbs and flows. It really swells and then really pulls back. And the best versions that we've done, because when we do it live, we all improvise. It does change every time, but yeah, the best versions we've done is when it really gets that kind of crescendo decrescendo feeling where it really swells at the key moments. And it's just lots of little touches really, little harmony from somebody here or a flourish there, and there's a couple of changes to the chord progression and that kind of thing, but it's generally just about letting the song shine through and finding ways to support the lyrics. I think it's the main thing with this one.
Yeah, I mean that's all pretty much arranging focusing is if it's not in support of the lyrics and the story, it's kind of pointless in a way sometimes. Yeah,
Well, yeah, that's true. I suppose sometimes we're trying to weave in a tune or there's a sort of a slightly different musical point to be made. Perhaps it's a more, when it's a bit more upbeat, or if it's,
yeah.
I don't know, like, yeah. With this one in particular, with I think with so many people in the band as well, everyone finding a role that doesn't cloud it
Oh
felt
yeah,
like a really fine balance to kind of everyone holding back, really.
especially when
Um,
there's six of you. Yeah,
yeah,
doing stuff.
exactly,
There's
exactly.
because there's a whole variety of arrangement ideas from someone singing it unaccompanied or to someone singing and accompanying themselves on a concertina, all the
Mm,
way up to the highly arranged sort of stuff by Bellowhead that obviously John Spires was in,
yeah,
and 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 so yeah, I guess the more people you have involved in an arrangement process, or even just in playing an arrangement, the more vigilant you have to be in terms of not getting in the way in a way,
yeah.
but
That's
also
exactly it.
but
It's knowing when not to play, really, isn't it?
knowing when not to
So
play.
often.
That's the thing
Yeah.
about playing. I mean, I play a lot for Kayleys and things, and I was always taught the gaps between the notes are what makes a dance tune, not the notes. The
Yeah.
notes are just the music. What makes it rhythmic is the gaps between the notes, and
Hmm.
and the same sort of thing applies. It's when not to play. It's does does this bit of the song need me? Does this arrangement? Don't be afraid to not play anything for 20 minutes, not 20 minutes, but for a longer period of time than might seem right, but
Yeah, absolutely.
and yeah, I guess that kind of arrangement process, it's yeah, I mean there's six of you, so that has to be, I guess you have to be very on it, I think, mentally, I guess, because when the more people you get, the more you have to be on it. The,
Yeah,
the,
exactly,
the
exactly.
yeah, the extreme end is Bellowhead, where the arrangements are written in advance, but you couldn't really do your thing with 11 people.
No, well, it's interesting talking obviously to John about that
Yeah,
process because he says when, with Bellowhead, it tends to be someone brings an arrangement and then we learn the arrangement. And he did say recently to us, he said, I think like six people is the sort of limit for this kind of working process where everybody has a say in nearly all the decisions, really.
yeah,
We've just made an album and we'll be touring it in April, and all traditional songs. And we spent a really long time, like really deconstructing everything to reconstruct it to fit for the six-person thing.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, it was a very satisfying process, but a very lengthy one.
yeah. It
Um,
can take a while. I remember this is going back to my days on the folk music degree at Newcastle University. one of the modules in the first year is a module called Ensemble, in which you get the whole class together, the whole year group together, and you just learn some tunes and songs and you arrange them as a group. But the more often than not, the staff kind of just left us to it. There were two. You met twice a week for ensemble, one of which was tutored and one was untutored, and the staff picked the songs in tune and said, "Off you go, arrange this lot." And we had the biggest year group I think ever on the photo group. We had 28 people, and they just let us, and we had to collectively arrange a set of tunes and a couple of songs. And in the end, I just stopped contributing. Not I contributed, but in the end, there was no point in me having my 10 pence worth or something. I just thought, I'm just going to sit here and I'll just join in and I'll let some of the louder people sort of lead it, you know.
Yeah.
And it just becomes too chaotic, too many voices. And so, yeah, six probably, yeah, I reckon, yeah, six is probably a good, the most, I think.
Yeah.
And then Earl Brand, your one, I'm just looking it up here, for 5 minutes, 41 seconds. That's
It's not that long, actually.
no, it's
is
not,
it?
is it? I was,
It feels longer than that.
yeah, yeah. Well, you could play it at like half speed on the CD player or something, couldn't you? That would.
I suppose so. Gig spanner songs tend to come up quite long. We're not adverse to a 10-minute number, so maybe we're not whittling down those group decisions enough, but it seems to
Maybe.
work.
Or maybe you're just using a very short version of El Brand. I don't know. How many verses? Are you?
Now you put me on the
I always
spot.
forget to ask this in advance, and then they go, "Oh, I've no idea."
Well, I'm looking at it, and I did cut a few or kind of combined versions. I think it's 13. I may have got that slightly wrong. I definitely cut a few or switched to the different version. Because they've got different names. Eleanor, she's only Eleanor in version C. Otherwise, it's Ellender,
You
which
get
is not what I sing.
no, you get that a lot, Ellen Durr. You get that. Oh, we covered this song in the first season of the podcast because it's round 4. Lord Thomas and Fair Eleanor is sometimes Lord Thomas and Fair
Ellender.
Ellen Durr.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I guess I wonder if Eleanor is the kind of a slightly more modern equivalent of this slightly older Ellen
Yeah,
Durr.
maybe.
That sort of oral tradition on people's names in a way.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's an Appalachian thing. I don't know. Obviously, these were all
Maybe.
collected in America, so
Of course, yeah.
hmm, I'm not sure. It doesn't give me a clue. I'm
No,
looking.
that's fine. So no ponder on. So I don't know if your notes tell you or whether you can remember back that far, but is there anything you can say about your editing process in terms of what you cut out or how you said a couple of verses were like meshed together or something? Is there anything you can talk about there that you can drudge up from your memory?
Well, as I said, it was a while ago.
Yeah, yeah.
It was while we were actually at Cecil Sharp House in 2014 that I put together the version that I subsequently brought to Gig Spanner.
Right.
And I think I tried to edit the words down for brevity because there's actually quite a lot of repetition in the collected versions. I chose the tune that I liked best, and then I picked from the several versions for the words that I liked best, or that I felt rang best. Um, um, for instance, this version says, the love runs free in every vein. It comes at the beginning of a verse. It says, love runs free in every vein, but Father, you'll have no more. If you're not satisfied with this, I wish you were in some mother's chamber and me in some house or room. If I was in my mother's chamber, you'd be welcome there. I'll wind you east, I'll wind you west, I'll wind along with you. And I cut that down to, um, uh, love runs free in every vein, but Father, I'll have no more. If you are not pleased at this, he said, I'll wish you far away. No, wind you east, wind you west. So I just shortened it right down, if you see what I mean.
Sure.
Which I think is probably more similar to other version, but it is a little bit of actual editing from me as well, to be fair.
It's weird because we were talking earlier about the fact that the in terms of it being a ballad and naturally it's going to be longer, you have the breathing space to focus on the emotion of the characters a bit more sometimes, and one can go on a bit in terms of that, and but then at the same time sometimes you get to passages and you think, even within the breathing space of something, this really could have been a bit shorter.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes with the collected songs as well, actually, it's to do with someone's memory, and
Mm.
they've sung it, and it's gone a little bit awry, and they've almost just had another stab at the verse, but the collector is just kind of like, often I read them and I really think like, yeah, they were aiming for that the first time round, but they just couldn't quite get there, and so they've added in
Yeah.
something that didn't make as much sense, you know.
And you look at it from a almost like a contemporary songwriting sort of perspective, and you go, yeah, you could have got that sentiment out in 4 lines rather than 3 verses
Yeah,
or
exactly.
something. And maybe it's maybe just for the best if you just chop that down a bit, get the point across in 1 verse rather than 3,
Yeah,
because
be
there's
nice.
a time and place for the epic ballads, and I love that time and place. I'm all for it. But then sometimes, depending on the context of where you're performing and what kind of band you're in or outfit and things, sometimes uh yeah, brevity should be sought after, I guess, sometimes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah, this isn't actually as widely recorded a song, because there's actually a fair, in some ways, we did this with Steve earlier. There's a fair bit to talk about in terms of sort of the history of the song and whatever. But although it's this weird, there's a whole weird thing with the history of this song, as Steve pointed out, in that it's kind of there's actually 2 songs labeled Child Number 7.
yeah,
You've got Earl
yeah,
Brand and the Douglas Tragedy,
yeah,
which it's odd that Child gave them the same child number, which then meant that Steve Roud had to give it the same Roud number.
yeah,
And then some people have noted that actually the next song in the Roud Index, next week's episode, is the ballad Earl Linton, and that is actually very similar to this song. But
yeah,
Child gave it child number 8, which means Steve Roud had to give it the next Roud number as well. So, and so, yeah, you don't get, as we said with the field recordings, the oral tradition stuff earlier. It's really just America and one Douglas tragedy turning up in Scotland, the Bella Higgins one, and then the rest is kind of America on
yeah,
on the traditional sort of oral tradition side of things, and it tends to be Earl Brand rather than Douglas tragedy, except for
yeah.
Bella Higgins in Scotland. But then on the revival side, it's not a particularly widely sung song.
No, I found this, and I'm sort of surprised because um I just think it's such a good song. It seems odd that less not so many people have picked up on it.
Mm.
Um, yeah, in Cecil Sharp's notes, he says that the text with a tune is found in the Northumbrian minstrelsy. So um, I guess that's a like a British version. But
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, obviously he collected the American ones. In terms of versions that like to listen to, the main one that I picked up on was Jim Morray's version, and that's interesting because he does a version of the Douglas Tragedy, which is great.
And it's the
But
Douglas
then
tragedy, yeah.
yeah, but the he did the Cecil Sharp project, and the version on there is one he sings, but he's called it Earl Brand there, so he was obviously exploring the differences between the songs, and I do really like that version because it's got Jackie Oates singing on it too.
Oh
She
yeah.
does some really nice harmonies, um, and it's yeah, it's lovely, and it's a kind of a similarly, I'd say, I guess a slightly American-y feel the tune. But it is also completely different to mine. He must have used one of the other ones.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know that because Jim's sleeve notes for the Lord Douglas one on his album Skulk, it's a bit of a mishmash of stuff. He sort of took Lord Douglas sort of versions of it and then added stuff in from some of those the extant Danish ones
Yeah.
and added Hildebrand back in or something. I can't remember what he said, and so he genuinely made it his own in that way,
Mm.
which led to him winning Best Traditional Track at the 2013 Folk Awards.
Oh,
Back in
yes.
those
Yeah.
bygone days when we had folk awards.
Oh, weren't they good?
But yeah, so that came to, I guess that's the most sort of for a modern folk audience. That's Jim Moray's Lord Douglas on this album Skulk is kind of the most recognizable one, I
I
think,
think so.
in the
Yeah.
sort of the consciousness. And then there are other ones like, I mean, there's Earl Brand on the Gigsman about Big Band album, of course. And then other ones, yeah, Cecil Sharp Project, I noted down. And then one of our very regular contributors to In the Round is Brian Peters, who does a lot on the history side. He was a singing guest in the first season as well, but he's very knowledgeable on the history of a lot of child ballads, and particularly on Cecil Sharp's Appalachian work, and he occasionally has done duo work. Brian has occasionally done duo work with an American singer called Jeff Davies, and they made an album in 2013 called Sharp's Appalachian Harvest. And yeah, there's a version on there that Jeff Davis sings of Earl Brand again, rather than Douglas.
Right.
That's a version collected from Mr. Philander H. Fitzgerald from Virginia, 7th of May, 1918. And Dave Davies' sleeve note said, arguably Mr. Fitzgerald had the best name and the best beard of all the singers.
Brilliant.
I think, Sharp visited Mr. and Mrs. Philander Fitzgerald, a brief but profitable visit, apparently. And
Right.
and the first three verses of that version he sang on that album were collected from somewhere else. I think it's the first three verses are collected by Olive Dame Campbell from a Mrs. Moore in Georgia in May 1909, and the rest of it of Jeff Davis's version is this Mr. Philander Fitzgerald.
Brilliant.
And I'm looking at the notes for that one. Mrs. Moore's verses that Olive Dame Campbell collected included a line about a Quaker's queen.
Yes.
There's a wonderful and peculiar notion.
Yes. So I have to say, I cut that verse, the Quaker's Queen stuff, out of my version because it didn't really make any sense to me with the flow of the story that I was going for. But it is interesting. My father is of a Regis King. My mother's a Quaker's Queen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, I mean, that's fantastic, sort of descriptive and sort of imagery and that sort of thing. If you want to set the scene, but sometimes depending on what you want, what you're trying to get out of the song, might not be necessary, I guess.
No, well, I think the reason I cut it out was it didn't really go with the flow because the whole thing about it never shall be said that a steward's son had taken her out of town. So William is referred to as the steward's son from the beginning of the song.
Oh, okay.
And then that verse is him kind of saying, I am no steward's son, blah, blah, blah. But it kind of actually doesn't really go with well, why don't they like him then? Why are they all going to fight each other and kill each other if
Right.
the sort of initial premise of the song, he's sort of disproving it. I don't know. I suppose you could interpret it as still a kind of like he's just proud of who he is, but they still think he's a bit lowly. Yeah, or maybe it's a religious problem that they have with him. But
Yeah.
yeah,
There we go. It's a nice thing to include if you've got the room for it, or if you've got the
yeah,
for it.
it is. Yeah.
So that's the version sung by Jeff Davis on his album with Brian Peters, Sharp's Appalachian Harvest. One final one, the American singer Sarah Gray. It was wonderful. We love Sarah Gray.
Yeah.
She did an album back in 1994 called Sarah, and she sang Sweet William on that, and that's a version of Earl Brand. I don't think she says where that particular version is from. She wrote copious sleeve notes, and I'm trying to scan through them now to see. I should have done this beforehand, really. I'll read some of it anyway. And she talks about other versions from North Carolina. Some versions from North Carolina end with, the blood red rose grew from her breast, and out of his a briar growed to the top of the church, etc. True love's not. That's what she wrote. And then said several mention, in quotes, her father's heart tumbling by her foot.
Oof.
Kind of weird imagery.
Yeah. Gosh.
And then you get one version that says, Sweet William died of wounds, Barbary died for sorrow, his mother died for the love of both, and buried on Easter Monday.
Oof.
That doesn't rhyme. I not that it matters, but those are the versions. Obviously, those versions exist with that kind of text in it, which is interesting. And she's written, text without tunes can be found in Gavin Gregg's Folk Songs of the Northeast. Text with tunes can be found in the Northumbrian Minstrelsy. There you go, you mentioned that. Oh, it's the J. Collingwood Bruce and John Stokoe Northumbrian Minstrelsy, a collection of ballads, melodies, and small pipe tunes of Northumbria. I'm pretty sure that came up. Yes, I'm pretty sure we mentioned that on our In the Round Patreon when we did an episode on the song Elsie Marley, because Elsie Marley turns up in Northumbrian Minstrelsy.
Yeah.
So yes, we got Sarah Gray's version 1994, Cecil Sharp Project in 2011, Jim Moray's Lord Douglas in 2012, Jeff Davis in 2013, and then Gigspanner Big Band 2020.
Oh, it was 2020. There we go.
There we go, on the Natural Invention album.
Yeah.
So great. So we'll wrap things up here. Where can, from the date of this episode going out, which is the 19th of February, over the next weeks and months, where can people, I assume people can find you on the internet somewhere.
Absolutely. Me specifically, you could look on edgelarks.co.uk. That's my project with Phil, but I list all the stuff that I'm up to on there. But mainly over the next few months, the gigs I'll be doing are all Gigspanner related, which obviously is the project we've mainly been focusing on. And in particular, we have a Gigspanner Big Band album launch tour coming up in April, where we're playing all over the country. So do come and see us on that. They'll all be listed on my website or on gigspanner.com, and it would be great to see you there.
It's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the podcast, and I hope we have you back at some point for some more songs.
Yeah, I hope so. Thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
And great. And in the meantime, though, Hannah Martin, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Matt. Nice to meet you finally.
Oh, rise you up, you 7 brethren, and bring your sister down, for it never shall be said that a steward's son had taken her out of town. He mounted on the milk-white steed, and she rode the dapple grey. He hung his bugle round his neck, and so they rode away. They had not gone but a mile or two, till he looked back again, and saw her father and 7 brothers come riding o'er the plain. Oh, set you down, Eleanor, he cried, and hold the steed by rein, till I play a while with your dear father, and all of your 7 brethren. Fair Eleanor, she sat still, and never changed a word, until she saw her 7 brothers all wallowing in their blood. Oh, hold your hand, William, she cries. Oh, hold your hand, for sure, for love runs free in every vein. But, Father, I'll have no more if you are not pleased at this, he said. I'll wish you far away, no wind you east or wind you west. I'll go along with you. He rolled them up to his mother's gate, and loudly he did ring, saying, "Oh, dear mother, asleep or awake, arise and let me in, and sister, sister, make my bed. My wounds are awful sorrow, dear mother, bind my head, for me you will bind no more." It was 3 hours before the day the cock began to crow from every wound that he'd received. His blood began to flow. Sweet William, he died today. Fair Eleanor tomorrow. sweet William died from the wounds he'd received. Fair Eleanor died for sorrow, and Eleanor was buried by the church, sweet William beside her, and out of her breast sprung a blood-red rose, and out of his a briar they grew to the top of the church, till they could grow no higher, and there they tied the true love's knot, and the rose ran around the briar.
That was Hannah Martin singing Earl Brand. And that brings us to the end of this episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to drop me an email at intherowd@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on the various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky. Just search for In the Rowd, a folk song podcast. If you are enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would spare a couple of seconds really, and give us a little rating and a review on wherever you get your podcasts from, if such things are allowed. I know there are some apps that don't do rating and reviews, but if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or something similar, where there's the opportunity to give us a star rating and write a little, preferably positive review, that'd be very much appreciated. On YouTube, that equates to the like button, subscribing and writing comments on the episodes as well. That all really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. Over on our Patreon, recently we had an episode which you all heard on the main podcast, the Singer Spotlight with Nora Rhodes, talking about Emma Dusenberry. We've also recently had Vic Gammon coming on and talking about the history of the song Old MacDonald Had a Farm. And last week we had a Region Spotlight episode with Paul Wilson and Marilyn Tucker discussing folk song collecting in Devon. If you feel so moved that you can support the podcast financially, then please head on over to patreon.com/intherowd and then sign up for either £5 or £10 per month, and you can receive weekly bonus content in return. This week there is no new Patreon episode, but we'll be back next week with the start of a brand new Singer's Choice mini-season. My guest this time for 3 episodes will be the singer, cellist and fiddle player Rachel McShane. For her first choice, we'll be joined by Steve Gardam again as we look at the song labelled Rowd 379, Green Broom. Sign up to hear this and more at www.patreon.com/intherowd. In the Rowd is a media partner of Veteran, the traditional music label. Although this week's song does not currently feature on any of their releases, you can find details of their extensive catalogue on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guests Steve Gardam and Hannah Martin. Join me next week for episode 4. We will be looking at Rowd 24, which is Child Ballad number 8, Linton. Like last week with Gil Brenton, this one is another child ballad which is practically unknown these days. Last week's historical guest, Helen Lindley, will be back, and since she's one of the only people to have ever done a new setting of the song, she will also be the singer guest, and we'll just do it all in one single chat, rather than splitting the episode in half. What fun we're having! Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Rowd.